Hi, I am Sarah Schlickert, and I am really glad to be joined by my husband Chris today, who has already told me that I asked 12-part questions. So this should be really interesting, or not. But my husband Chris is the director of Retreat and Camping Ministries for the Baltimore, Washington Conference of the United Methodist Church. And I know right now a lot of us who serve local churches and even those who lead organizations are struggling not only with how to kind of maintain in this time of shutdown and stay-at-home orders, which are different in different states and what that looks like, but everybody's beginning to shift to what reopening looks like and what will the path be, and whether there are events and programs that we have scheduled for the summer that can happen, and when do we reopen, and it's very overwhelming. Camp and Retreats just announced at the beginning of this week, along with the support of the Baltimore, Washington Conference leadership, that they were going to be canceling their summer camp programs that are run on their sites at West River, Harmison, and Manadokan. So I wanted to ask my husband Chris to share a little bit with us about their discernment and decision-making process, not so that other organizations or churches can do what they did, because some of the factors are really different for camp than it would be for other folks, but so that maybe you can learn a little bit about the discussions and what that process was like as you do some of the same discernment. So Chris, camp, the first week of camp, regular camp, was going to be in the middle of June, but you all made the decision at the very beginning of May to close. Can you say a little bit about why that was your timeline for making the decision, and why you didn't wait till you were closer to the start of camp, and then maybe a few of the key factors that you were reflecting on and that were part of your discernment along the way?
Yeah. So as you said, camp would still be about 6 or 7 weeks away at this point. But one of the things for camp that we needed to think about was the amount of time that it takes to ramp up and be ready to welcome our campers. And it's something that, as we talked about things, typically we're spending all spring getting ready, because we might be adding new activities. There are just a million different pieces that go into that. And so as we were looking at how we were going to respond to the coronavirus pandemic, we wanted to come up with a timeline of, okay, how long would it really take to get camp up and running so that we could welcome campers?
Working backwards.
Exactly. And so as we went through that process, we kind of came up with the answer that we would need at least 4 weeks to get camp up and running. And so then we needed to work backwards from that start date to figure out when would we need to be able to get our year-round staff back on site, and when would we need to be able to get our summer staff on site. Because as our staff are coming in, one of the big things we have to do is train them. And that is typically a couple-week process, because most of our staff are coming in not knowing how to lead the different activities at camp. Maybe they did them as a camper, but they need to learn how to belay at the wall. They need to learn how to rescue a canoe. They need to be trained as lifeguards, all those different pieces. And so we had some things in there that we just couldn't really speed the process up anymore, because it just takes a certain amount of time to gain that knowledge so they could lead the activities. There were also things like... So
you had decided ahead of time that the beginning of May was going to be, middle of May was you had to make the decision for the summer at that point.
Yeah, so we initially talked about potentially 2 different dates that we would talk about things, and needing to make a decision at the beginning of May regarding our June programs, and then by the middle of May, kind of regarding the rest of our summer camp programs, because our programs really end by the beginning of August, and then we actually have outside groups that come in and use our facilities for the balance of the summer. And so we needed to take a look at how long it would take to get going, and then how many weeks of camp we could actually run.
Right.
And so those were the 2 dates that we initially came up with. But as we were starting to talk through that process, we needed to figure out, in addition to the time frame, what were the conditions that we felt we needed to have in place to be able to safely run camp. And safety is the key thing there.
Right.
In camp, everything we do revolves around safety. We talk about safety being non-negotiable. And so we needed to make sure that we could keep our campers safe, but also our staff and our volunteers. When you look at all of our sites, we typically have about 350 staff or volunteers during the course of the summer who are coming out. And so we needed to think about them as well. And so there were some initial conditions that we started to talk about that we needed to.
And so, what were some of those? What were those initial conditions? And this was even before, like, the governor of Maryland had rolled out his phases. Like, you all were already figuring that out.
Right.
Looking at stuff from the CDC and other camping folks who were talking about. So, what were some of those kind of basic conditions for you all that you felt you needed to be able to operate like anything?
Yep. So, so first of all, we tried to educate ourselves. So we did look at information from the CDC, from the state of Maryland Health Department, and there were some great networks of camp leaders from around the country and the American Camp Association as well. So there were a lot of webinars and conversations just to try to kind of educate ourselves about what we were dealing with so that we could take that knowledge and kind of translate that into our specific situation.
Because even just like camps and churches are different. Like every camp,
right?
Even camps all in Maryland, there's just so many different factors that's going to shape them. So the decision that you all made might be different than a camp down the road. The decision that one church makes may not work for another church for those same reasons.
Yep. So things that we initially talked about as being things where we just weren't sure we could safely run camp under those conditions. And the first was the 6-foot physical distancing. When we think about camp is all about community and coming together and sharing space with each other. It's sitting around the campfire and you're packed in on a bench and you're singing songs.
Spotting people up on the wall.
Exactly, spotting on the low ropes course. Even being in a canoe or a raft together, people are in tight space. And talk about our lodging, right? Bunk beds, we put a lot of people in a room. And so that was the first thing that we were trying to wrap our heads around. And we really wrestled with that, would it be something that we felt we could safely run camp with 6-foot social distancing? And what changes would we need to make in order to run camp in that situation? And as we dug down into all the little details, it was something that we felt we just couldn't do, at this time.
And that's going to be a challenge. I know a lot of churches are wrestling with their programs in particular for children and youth, not only because so many of the activities we do with children and youth are in close proximity, but also because it can be difficult to get kids to maintain those. I know in our neighborhood, honestly, the kids have been the ones maintaining social distance better than some of the adults in our neighborhood. But it's hard when you get a big group because they get caught up. They're not thinking of it. And so even if you could come up with those processes, maintaining that, might be challenging.
And also thinking about those shared objects that we use all the time in camp that you don't necessarily think about normally, but in this situation we need to. So something as simple as doing arts and crafts. Right, where everybody's digging into the same bin of crayons and using the same glue sticks and scissors and things like that when we need to be disinfecting those things in between use. As we started to look at those real details about each of our activities, it pretty quickly got to be a situation we didn't think that we could operate camp under.
And hygiene. Can you talk a little bit about cleanliness and hygiene and supplies? Because I know one of the things, we all know in our own personal shopping trips that sometimes I have stores, the couple of stores that I've gone to occasionally for us where I haven't found toilet paper or paper towels, and it's a little different because you all can order food service stuff. But can you talk about some of the supplies that would be critical to have to open and what getting resupplied on that would have looked like?
Right, that was one of the concerns for us too, was even if we were to open up, could we get all of the things in the quantities that we needed so that we could, again, keep everybody safe? So, we have activities where we don't have access to running water to be able to wash hands out on our properties at our different activities. So that means we're going to need a lot of hand sanitizer. Can we get, the gallons of hand sanitizer that we would have needed to be able to place those at all the different activities?
Right, because when you're sharing things, so if the kids are touching
Canoe
canoe paddles
harnesses,
that
yep.
normally you wouldn't worry so much about them washing in between things,
Mm-hmm.
but in this season you would have to.
Right. So things like that, we would, need to have masks and everything for our staff to wear. Can we get those? Can we have them in the quantity that we need so that our staff and our volunteers are able to have those things? Even just basic disinfecting, cleaners for going around the site. We were trying to figure out how many additional staff we might actually need to have just to be doing cleaning in between every group at the dining hall, because we would need to eat in shifts instead of having everybody come in at once, in order to wipe down all those canoe paddles, wipe down all the doorknobs, all the faucets, all those sorts of things.
Well,
between groups.
In early phases, at least here in Maryland, there were some regulations on shared spaces, and so is it phase 1? I know one of the early phases, I remember as you were thinking, that groups wouldn't, groups of 10 or more, you had to have groups of 10 or less, and they couldn't share bathroom facilities.
Right. That was some of the pieces that have been talked about is, you would have to have groups of 10 or less. That also was a factor for us in our decision, was group sizes of 50 or less, because we lose all of our efficiencies in our programming, because we need to maintain our safe sanctuaries policies.
Right.
So if we have a group of 10, we have to have 2 adults with that.
You can only have 8 kids.
So now we can only have 8 kids in a group, right. 2 adults. And if we're not able to share staff between groups, then each staff person has to be trained on each activity, right. which we don't necessarily do right now. We have staff who specialize in different ones, and groups travel between the staff. So even those sorts of changes were things that we were looking at.
Well, and so and thinking about, we were mentioning, just going back real quick to supplies. I know there if I recall from that, there was some discussion about even if kind of those camping groups that were doing Zoom calls and stuff, information calls, even if camps could get the hand sanitizer and the mask, the personal protective equipment they needed, whether they would be taking that from frontline workers, not even so much maybe at hospitals, but at grocery stores and those places where they really have to have them. So as you were thinking about kind of shared spaces and groups and having kids kind of mixed together, I know one of the other things that you all have the dynamic at our conference camps, as many churches would, of paid staff and also volunteers. And those volunteers kind of span the whole range of ages, of people who would be most at risk, as do your campers. Can you say a little bit about how you thought about kind of volunteers and camper groups and how that affected your decisions, as really some folks are more at risk than others?
Yeah, certainly. There are, all sorts of different populations that come out to camp, both in terms of, age and other risk factors, with the coronavirus in particular. But we also had to keep in mind that we're drawing from a fairly large geographical area, and more so than like a church.
One that has been,
most cases.
and we're in an area too of like a massive hotspot here around, the DMV area.
Yep. So we had to think about where we were, pulling campers from and volunteers as well, and how we would kind of be a mixing area for different parts of the state. And so that was certainly a concern for us as well. But we did think about the whole range of populations and folks who might be at risk at camp. So we had some programs that we actually canceled ahead of time because they do work with camper groups that could be at higher risk for coronavirus. And that was also a concern that we had as far as our volunteers. Would our volunteers be comfortable coming out as well if we have folks who were older and were more concerned about the effects of coronavirus. So we needed to think in terms of our staffing as well, of what if we don't have the volunteer pool that we normally do? So again, we might need to have additional staff to make up for fewer volunteers. But that was a concern.
Which could be an issue really on an ongoing basis for really everybody, local churches, other organizations, because as long as this goes on, even if things open back up, there could be folks not only who don't come out to attend things, but who aren't, those kind of reliable volunteers. Yep. And so really needing to have a bigger group of volunteers forces us to think, there's all these factors of just because you can do something doesn't mean you can do it.
Right.
I know that Governor Hogan here in Maryland has talked about how contact tracing is going to be one of the key factors moving forward. That if we can get the cases low enough so that when we do have new cases, they can reach out to people who might have been in contact with that person. And how did thinking about contact tracing inform your decision making? And so some of the decision making for the summer is going to kind of impact things going forward. But how does our current understanding of what contact tracing might involve shape your discernment?
Right. Certainly, that was one of the concerns for us was, what if somebody is showing the signs and symptoms while they're at camp? And what does that mean then for everybody who has interacted with them? Our staff live in a shared space all summer long. And so one of the concerns was if a camper or volunteer, showed signs or told us they tested positive, after they'd gotten back home from camp or something, what would that mean for those of us who were still there? Mm-hmm. And it seemed very quickly, because of being in those shared spaces, that we would potentially need to quarantine our staff then. Mm-hmm. And that also would shut down our program, even if we had been up and running. And so that was a concern of, we could ramp up, but then if we have something happen, it could not just shut down one part of what we're doing, but really shut kind of the whole site down.
And I know, looking at kind of the financial ramifications is also one of the things you looked at. And for camp, of course, you can estimate you can predict if you have X number of campers, you'll get income. And it's a little bit, it's different for churches, mm-hmm. but worst case scenario in terms of this summer would have been what for you all?
Yeah.
Financially.
Right. So financially, the worst case scenario for us was not actually canceling the entire summer. The worst case scenario is actually
not canceling the whole summer in May. It wasn't
right. But ramping up, getting all the staff on site, getting them trained, getting them ready to go, and then having to shut down. Right. Because there's a lot of cost that goes mm-hmm. into getting everything up and running. Right. And so we would have much more expenses and then still not have the income. Mm-hmm. So that was actually kind of the worst case scenario.
Okay. And, the Governor Hogan has said that maybe next week we'll get into phase one, but really it's clear that this process is going to be long, and there's the recovery from the virus and however long that takes, and getting a vaccine or treatments that allow some comfort there. But the economic recovery from job loss and from all of this is going to ripple probably for years. Mm-hmm. How do you anticipate, what does that look like for ministries, for camping? And what are some of the things that you're going to be watching or that you're going to be concerned about, and not just the next 3 months, but in the year or two ahead?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? Is what's the real long-term impact of all of this? And it's really hard to say. We don't know exactly, but we are trying to plan for what do things look like for us in the fall, mm-hmm. As far as when we would transition into our retreat season. Are we going to have groups that aren't wanting to come out? But we're trying to work with those groups. Mm-hmm. We're trying to focus on maintaining relationships. Mm-hmm. So both for our summer campers, our mission does not end just because people are not on site at camp. Mm-hmm. We still have a mission. We mm-hmm. still want to engage with all of these campers, help them to grow personally, mm-hmm. help them to grow spiritually, stay in community with them. And so we're trying to pivot and figure out how we can do those things online, mm-hmm. hopefully do some things on site as some mm-hmm. restrictions open up. But we want to maintain those relationships, mm-hmm. and we want to continue to stay focused on our mission. And same thing is true with our retreat groups. We want to be as gracious as we can with those groups and help work with them so that they can hold their retreats at a time that's safe for them to do that. We're trying to make the best plans that we can financially and as far as continuing the ministry, but we want to make sure that the long-term health of the ministry is there, that we're able to continue in the long term.
And that I think that really is a challenge that I think we get really caught up, whether at camp or churches, or is we really are living day to day. And so it can be really hard to think about what are things going to look like in a month, but there's also that long view of a year or 2 years. And as is true in life often, that sometimes the 2-year view really has to take precedence over the mm-hmm. 1 month view. That's some of what you all did of saying, we've got to be able to kind of look for sustainability over the long haul. I know that you all are very blessed, our camper retreats, because of the really healthy and robust relationship that our camping program has with our annual conference, which is not true in almost any other annual conference. And so, I mean, all of these factors affect how any organization is able to make decisions. What kind of support do they have, both internally and then kind of their surrounding support network. And I know that that's true, that not only as an organization, but also as individuals. What has this process been like for you as a leader? What has it felt like? What have been, I mean, can you talk about maybe some key moments in the process, and like what has that felt like for you? What have you felt like was needed as a leader through this process?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a gut-wrenching roller coaster, trying to figure all this out. I got into ministry for summer camp and for the impact that these summer experiences have. It's what happened in my own life. And so I know that impact. And so it was incredibly difficult to make a decision to cancel those on-site programs, knowing that there would be some kids who wouldn't have that opportunity this summer. That was really difficult to do. But trying to stay focused on the long term was helpful. Knowing that the ministry would be able to continue there was really key. But it's been difficult. There have been some great support networks out there, and my colleagues. So I think I mentioned at the beginning some of those organizations, the UMCRM.
United Methodist Camper Retreat Leaders.
Yep. They've got a great network. And so there were Zoom calls and webinars multiple times a week on different topics with different groups to try to talk through and process these different things. The American Camp Association, which is a national organization that sets some standards in camping, has been really beneficial as well. There's the Association of Camp Nurses also that helped guide us and provide information. So having those networks was good, but being able to know that other people were struggling as well. But for me also to hear some people say, that they're having those same difficulties was really helpful, to know that we were talking about the right things, asking the right kind of questions, and that we were coming up with the answers that were right for our organization. So it was really good to be able to talk about those things with those colleagues, but also, as you said, the conference leadership. We have an amazing relationship with them, and it was wonderful working with those folks as we really tried to process through all the different levels of this and how could we make the best decision for the ministry. And protecting everybody's safety. It
really is helpful in the midst of this to really, I mean, we use the phrase, we're all in this together, but tangibly feeling that, whether that's through somebody saying you're doing a good job, or I know this is hard. It's really struck me that in the midst of this, anybody saying that they know what you should do, like, not I mean you personally, like, this is what you should do, is great. Like, nobody's been through this before. Right. And so we're all trying to kind of work this out as we're going. As you look ahead at what we talked a little bit, financially, all these questions of what's going to be how is this going to affect camp, churches? Churches have to figure out not just the next couple of months, but what's the year end going to look like? What's next year going to look like? And we just don't know. But what are some of the key pieces that you now, looking ahead, are going to be following? You've made the decision for the summer, but what are some of the key pieces of information that you're going to be following as you help lead your ministry through the coming months and years?
So certainly paying attention to all the health guidelines that are out there. We made one decision, but we still have lots and lots more decisions to make. We're still working with our August retreat groups about if those events are going to happen as we get towards the end of the summer. So one decision is made, but not all of them. And so, certainly staying on top of those things. Other pieces that we're looking at, like we said, how do we maintain those relationships that we currently have so that as we're able to open up more fully, we can welcome those folks back. Other things that we'll be looking at are what are improvements that we can make to our programs, to our sites, so that when we welcome folks back, we're going to be as good as we can possibly be. So, I think there are going to be a lot of buildings getting a fresh coat of paint. We're going to work on those sorts of things. So that as folks come back, we want to keep that kind of excitement about the ministry, and that we're really ready and firing on all cylinders when folks do come back.
Okay. Well, I think it's probably too soon to kind of reflect on things that any of us wish we would have done differently. It's going to be years before we figure that out. But you are a little bit kind of on the leading edge of this in terms of decision making. But I know I did want to mention one thing else that you've mentioned about a key discernment piece about an organization, a church or a ministry is assessing their risk tolerance. And that's one of those pieces. When we look at different churches or different ministries are going to make different decisions. Can you say a little bit about risk tolerance and maybe how you've seen that shape decisions of other camping programs?
Yeah, certainly. So you have to I think, have a real honest conversation with the leaders in your group of, how close to that leading edge.
Do we want to be the first ones to try?
Right. How close to that leading edge are you really comfortable being? And I think being honest about that.
Because being close to the leading edge suggests greater risk.
Right.
You're going to be the early adopters, the one to try it first.
Exactly. And so one of the things that we talked about in our decision, but I know other organizations talked about as well in the camping world was, what if we open up and we have a case and we now are in the media for being, the epicenter of an outbreak in a community or something, and what impact that would have on the long-term ministry. I mean, obviously the immediate health concern of that, but the long-term impact of the negative media and things like that. And so I know that factored in as well, but that's one of those pieces about the risk tolerance of the organization, and one of those things that you have to kind of weigh.
And all of those things. So, as organizations and leaders are trying to make these decisions now, and it's not just the coming days, like you said, you've made one decision. There's so many more decisions, and it's possible that this whole journey will not be a linear one. That maybe things will loosen up here in Maryland. I think the governor's figured out that there's some cabin fever, and so he's recently just allowed some opening of outdoor activities. But he almost strikes me kind of like I've seen him referred to as one of America's dads of don't disappoint me, and so everybody's got to play by the rules so that we don't get our privileges taken away. But it, like you said, it really is this. It's going to be this ongoing process of watching what happens and seeing how that affects you all, and even everything may change. It's just all very, very fluid. Well, do you have any other thoughts that you want to share? Anything else about kind of the process? I know we've listed some factors. I feel like from kind of knowing some of the discussions, we could easily sit here and list 200 different factors that you've considered, and we've just mentioned a few of them here. But what is your hope for our faith communities? Camp is kind of pulls together people from lots of churches, but what is your hope? Let's say this. What is your hope for other leaders who are in a position, who've been in a position that you've been in? Again, it's not like all your decisions are done, but as leaders come up to the decisions about whether to have things or cancel things, what is your hope that leaders will keep in mind as they do that?
Yeah, I hope that folks will know that they're not alone, that everybody is struggling in this. Nobody has all of the answers, but rely on your community of colleagues to help you kind of discern that, and the leaders that you have within your organization. Have good, honest, frank conversations with those folks.
With as much tangible information as you can get, both internal information about your own finances, what folks are willing to do, as well as state and local health guidelines and all of that.
Yep. And know that you may need to make some very difficult decisions. And what maybe who you attribute it to, but I know you say it and have used this before, but there's no way out of a painful situation without pain.
I think it may have been Winston Churchill.
Okay.
I don't know.
But,
I don't know. If you're going through hell, keep on going, something like that. Yeah,
but,
right.
this is a painful situation, and we don't know exactly what it'll be going forward, but there will be difficulty in that. But know that you're not alone. Make the best decisions that you can. Be able to and willing to adapt and adjust as the information around you changes and as the situation changes.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for doing this Facebook video. It's always more nerve-wracking for you. I'll just talk forever.
Yep.
So I thank you very much.
I'm usually behind the camera.
Yes, but thank you very much for doing this. And if folks have any questions about anything else about the process as a leader that Chris went through, let me know, and we can maybe revisit that or at least kind of share information. I know that leaders of our congregations are just really struggling, balancing all the logistics, but also knowing that folks want to gather together in the same way that you really are mourning not being able to have kids involved at camp in the same way.
Right.
So to everybody out there who's doing this work, you are not alone, and let's continue to encourage each other. And to do the hard work that's before us. That is the season we've been called to be leaders. Thank you so much for joining us.